Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of the Working While Homeschooling podcast, the podcast for workingwhilehomeschooling.com, where our mission is to help homeschooling parents make money, maybe even have a career, while continuing to homeschool and without losing their sanity. My name is Julie, and I am your host and resident career coach today. I want to thank you for joining us and listening in. I hope you're doing well. Today's episode is part 1 of a conversation I had with Colleen, who is running the site My Homeschool Hub. If you're an entrepreneur or business owner, this announcement is for you. Do you have questions about how to get more clients or wonder how you can do more with less? Do you have big, crazy dreams that you're not quite sure how to tackle? Or perhaps you're wondering how you could make a real income doing any of it? If you've said yes to any of the above, you should consider signing up for one of my business entrepreneur coaching sessions. Now, being your own boss is great, but working on your own doesn't mean you have to go it alone. Coaching is going to provide you the accountability and support you need so that you can reap the rewards of being a solo entrepreneur with less doubt, stress, and struggle. So give yourself an edge over the competition. You can check out my one-on-one coaching services at my site or below. It really is time for you to be able to write your own success story. So let me help you. Again, check out the link on my site or below. So Colleen, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Colleen Robinson, and I own my Homeschool Hub. It's an online marketplace, place for people to connect with other homeschoolers. I've been homeschooling for 8 years, and I have 3 boys, ages 10 to 14.
So you had some questions today that you wanted to talk to me about as a career coach and a business coach about running your business.
I do. I've been doing my business for a while, and in the last 6 to 8 months, my family has gone through some really unexpected, huge challenges. We were in crisis for a little while. So we're finally through those situations. I'm getting back on that horse now, if you don't mind me saying that way. What I would like to know is what perspective you can give me on how to get back into the game, how to be able to get past the hardships that we've been through and get my mind back focused and get back in that groove that I used to have and that I was in so well that I've been missing out on lately.
Yeah. You know, one of the great things about this homeschooling lifestyle that we have is that we can take time out for family issues. I mean, we can be flexible. That's the whole point, which is great. But, it's a common thing to have to get back in the groove. And I think as a business owner, because now there's income involved, hopefully, it makes it even more imperative and a little bit more stressful. So I know, I move every 2 years. I have chronic illness as well. So, there have been many times I've had to do that. There are a couple little personal tricks that I use. One of them is setting office hours and sticking to the schedule. So basically recreating a routine.
Yeah, that's great.
So if I'm let's say my office hours are from 9 to 12 every morning. I might sit there, frankly, and be productive from 9 to 11, but I'm still sitting there. Sometimes going back to just focusing on the habits gets you back into the routine, and getting into the routine, it's like the mental follows the physical. So if you can get back into the physical routines, your brain will eventually follow.
Right.
So that's one thing I will do is going back to the very, very, very basic of just setting up the routine. But for example, I spent one entire day last week cleaning off the surface of my desk. That, because I was so buried, it was impossible for me to get anything done. And it took me far too long. I'm not going to admit how long, but far too long to actually do that. But having to go through and think about those things kind of did a little bit of a brain refresh.
Right.
Got me back into routine. So as much as I should have been sitting there editing podcasts, do my emails, blah, 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 I was a little bit brain fried at the moment, and I just couldn't mentally get there. So I picked another thing on the to-do list to do, something that my brain could handle. The other thing I found is sometimes it's dealing with the overwhelm, because when you come back to it, it's like, oh my gosh, I just took 3 weeks off. There's so much backlog, and then there's all the stuff you're supposed to be doing doing day to day anyway.
Right.
Overwhelm can almost freeze you. Right?
Definitely paralyzing.
It is. It is. So one of the things I personally do is, frankly, I write out my to-do list, and every single little minutia thing that needs to be done goes in the to-do list. I start to group those by, I group like with like. So if I have 50 phone calls, I have all the phone calls written in one column, for example. All the emails go in another column. At some point, when I start kind of organizing my thoughts, I find that kind of listening to the record player in your head is a bad thing. Okay. And like when your brain is like on overload, and it's just, to me, I kind of visualize just being filled, like overfull.
Yeah.
You can't think. So barfing it out on paper, which is crass, but that's kind of how I think of it. Just get it out of your head and put it on a piece of paper. There's something about the process for me that just clears my brain out and allows me to kind of mentally review and process.
Right.
And then I just pick one thing. Like you were talking about getting on the horse. Don't try to do 50 because that's too much. Emotionally, for me, that's too much. I just pick one. And I just do that one thing. If it's sending out one email, and I kind of put the blinders on and focus on just that one thing until that thing is done. I'm not trying to multitask. Okay. Science has proven multitasking doesn't work and is actually worse for you. So I don't do that. I just kind of put the little horse blinders on and focus on that one little thing, and that's it until it's done. And then I do one more. And these can be small. I'm talking like it could be one email, and then I can cross that off my list. And then I go to the next email. So it's almost like you have to kind of go from big pictures, the first thing, barfing it all out, creating your plan, and then just do one thing, and then just do the other thing. I think even getting back on the horse makes it feel like too big to do.
Right.
You know? So just do one thing. You know, like just do one.
Just,
don't make it so
just
big.
care for the horse. Like look at the horse and decide what you need to do. I love the barfing it all out on paper because that's safe too. You have a safe place to put it and you're not going to lose it. Like when we stir in our mind and it's spinning in our minds, it's like we can regurgitate it because we don't want to lose it. But by getting it on paper, it's safe. You can track it. You're not going to forget it, right?
Yeah, that spinning your minds is exactly. I mean, I get spun up. You know, I grew up in the South.
Yes.
So something to me, but you know, it gets up in your brain and it just keeps going faster, and you just get stuck in that cycle of being spun up. And
one leads to another, and it gets to another task, and then you can't remember where you started. Yes, totally. That's exactly how I feel, like a hurricane or a tornado.
Yes. Do you hear like the violence in the language you're even using? Hurricanes and tornadoes.
I know. You're right.
You know what I'm saying? That's crazy. So take a breath.
Yeah.
Sit down and take a breath. You know, you are one human being. You only get 24 hours in a day. You do have to sleep at some point. Certain things you have to do in life, like, you know, make sure the kids are fed, you know, so they don't rebel. You know, there's certain things you just have to do. And then you work with what you have left. And I will tell you, oftentimes, this is me confessing, I felt when I would go through this process, I would look at my 50 pages of chicken scratch overwhelm where I barfed it all out and I organized or whatever. I had to stop even looking at that because looking at it, I would start to there's just no way I can get this done. There's just no way. And then I would start to almost defeat myself in advance, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's the story Black Beauty from childhood. Basically, they talk about they put blinders on the horse, and so the horse can't look from side to side. They can only look straight ahead. And I almost think that, you know what, I have to almost clear all of that on my head. I can't think about all those things right now. They're on a piece of paper. I'll get to them. I just can't. I just have to think about one thing and just do that one thing.
Right.
I may not be able to go as fast as someone else, you know, I may not be able to, but I'm going to go at the pace that frankly God has put me in. And I'm just going to focus on my one thing. I'm going to do that correct. And then I'll move to the next.
Right. Well, and one thing always leads to another, right? When you accomplish one thing, that's good. You start to get your momentum back and you get back in your groove and things start taking off. And sometimes it just takes that one thing to be able to rejuvenate yourself, you know?
And it's okay if it takes more than one. Okay. It's okay if this process takes a while. And if you have to try different things out, you know, I think I've gone through that as well. As you know, I would have this, you know, I've had to kind of regurgitate my plan a couple of times. I can only make certain phone calls between this hour and this hour. And I know. And the only time I'm available to do it between this hour and this hour because of the kids or whatever is block. So I almost go create an appointment for myself and write them in that block. And maybe I don't get through all 5 phone calls because one of them took 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and then, but I can't beat myself up over that I didn't get through my goals of 5 phone calls, because that's what I do, is I'm really excellent at beating myself up. And so, I excel at it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I almost have to mentally tell the little voice in my head to shut up. I'm like, no.
Totally.
Yes, that phone call took 30 minutes. And yes, I should have been able to get through all 5 phone calls in an hour. But you know what? I'm not fully in control of that. The other person on the phone is, I was like, but at least that one thing got done.
Mm-hmm.
At least this got done. And that's kind of how I started to talk to myself, is at least that's off my plate. No, one email shouldn't take you an hour to write, but it did. So at least that's done. And that's almost where I had to start. We were speaking before about speaking well to yourself. That's almost where I had to start. I wasn't able to compliment myself very well at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes this is a process. And for some of it, for me, it took longer than frankly I thought it should. But, we have to get to where we're going to be, where we're supposed to be in our journey,
right,
at the speed we can go. We can't go at other people's speed.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like homeschooling our kids. I mean, that's how we treat our kids, right? We look at where they are as children, as they're growing, and we assess their educational needs, and then we adjust. That's the beauty of homeschooling. We're not comparing them to other people. We're not putting them on the pace that, the schools are putting them on. We need to give ourselves that same grace. We need to give ourselves that same leniency and trust the process that we're going through. And even if that phone call does take 30 minutes and you only wanted it to take 10 and you didn't get to make another phone call that day, maybe that next phone call wasn't supposed to happen that day,
Right.
I find that if I'm doing my best, I can trust that things are going to line out in the right timing that they're supposed to happen.
And the one thing that gave me personal, I was able to give myself permission about doing this better, is because I have my 2 girls watching me. And if you think back to our parents, we picked up things inadvertently on purpose by just living with our parents. Like, we picked up, kind of mental associations or mental cues or whatever it might be, just based on how we were raised, good or bad. And one of the things, when I was really impressed on me when my kids were very small, is that they're always watching me, especially when we're homeschooled, because we're all like they don't ever leave. So
right, we never get a break ever.
Oh my gosh. So, but they're always watching us, and they're picking. And I was like, oh my goodness, how I talk about myself, how I talk to myself, that's what's going to write the mental record player in their heads when they're adults. And I've been hyper aware of that, because I know, having talked to my mom now as an adult, some of the things that I picked up, she didn't intend for me to pick up, but she wasn't also maybe cognitively aware of it herself at the time. Every once in a while, just take a deep breath and there's no race, right?
Right.
So I've been really cognizant of that as my kids are growing up. Is like, I'm really careful about how I talk to myself. I'm really careful about how I talk about myself, and things just like giving yourself grace. I'm like, and I'll kind of talk my thoughts out loud so they see me doing it. It's like, that was really frustrating. I just sat on hold for a half an hour. But, at least I can mark that one thing off. At least that's done. And so I was like, oh, I finally accomplished this thing. I've gotten it marked off my list. Like, I'm almost like purposely trying to talk positively out loud so my kids pick up on it. But doing that has given me permission to be nicer to myself, because
that's great.
Since I'm doing it for them, almost, it's like that's how I tricked my brain into it. I'm doing this for them, but it gives me permission to be nicer to myself, which is silly, but it works. Sometimes you have to trick yourself.
I don't think it's silly. I think that we have to figure out how to be more gracious with ourselves. I think that working moms have a lot of hard challenges. It's so hard to work. It's so hard to balance everything that comes along with it, from the housework and the mom responsibilities and the wife responsibilities. And, it's not like we're just moms and wives. We're sisters and we're friends and we're daughters. There's so much more. And we at large, the community of homeschoolers, and then add the mommy guilt and the stress about if we're doing enough with the education. I think that's so critical that we figure out how to be more gracious with ourselves. And then we can be more gracious with our kids ourselves too when we're in a good space.
You also mentioned you had a question about kind of like that self-confidence when we were talking about, speaking well to yourself.
Yeah, it's a great time to segue into that since we're talking about being gracious. When you're dealing with all the tasks and the responsibilities and you're looking around with what you're doing with your kids, and you're making sure that you're staying on top of their educational needs and you're taking care of all those hats we were just talking about, wife, sister, mother, daughter, friends, all of those things. Sometimes I find myself just really speaking negatively to myself and beating myself up for not doing a better job. Like, oh my gosh, look, my kitchen should be cleaner. Look at my kitchen floor. Like my kitchen floor is embarrassing. And I beat myself up for that. So when you're in that space, and I'm sure that you've gone through it too. I think we all go through it. How do you catch yourself like in that moment where you realize, oh, I'm being really hard on myself. Let me try to bring that up, and so that you can have that positive self-talk and like out loud you learn how to do it. But sometimes you get in pretty deep and you can beat yourself up and it's hard to pull yourself out. How do you recommend doing that?
Well, the first one is to acknowledge it. Okay. Admit there's a problem. So one of the things is part of it's like that record player or the voice in your head, the voice that's always going to, that just, the little, peanuts, that voice, and it's on a record player and it never stops. But then you also have the self-talk that you're doing inside, your physical head, you're doing to yourself inside of your head. And, if you heard your kid talking to their sibling like that, you would put a stop to it immediately. Like, it'd be like, no, that's not how we talk in our house. No, that's not how we talk to each other. And you almost, I mentally call it parenting myself, but that's not really what it is. It's really like, every time you hear that, you just tell it to stop. No, stop. No, that's not true. And then you rewrite it. This is called reframing. There's a lot of like there's neuro-linguistics studies and stuff about this, but basically you reframe it correctly. No, I did not lose 50 pounds last year, but I did lose 15. Congratulations, I lost 15 pounds. So every time you come there, you can't just you have to stop it in its tracks and then redirect, right? Just
like name your success.
Yeah, well, just like rephrase it correctly. So it's not, oh, I didn't get this done and I'm so dumb and I'll never be successful. No, this is not done yet. I haven't gotten there yet. I have made progress, even though it's not done. So to me, it's like being honest with yourself, but not being a jerk to yourself. So yes, acknowledge the voice, because if you try to ignore it, that makes it worse.
As it gets louder, right? When you try to ignore it,
and
it gets
burrows
louder.
down deep, and the deeper it gets, the harder it is to dig it out, right? Like weed.
Right.
So it's a weed in your brain, and you just wait. That is not correct. This is more accurate. This is correct. And you tell it to yourself, and then you move on. And the next time it comes up, you do it again. Eventually, you are going to rewrite the record player in your head, and so those thoughts will be less and less. But that takes time, and you have to give this isn't like you do it once and it's over. You have to give yourself time to rewrite the record player in your head. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s. I have 40 plus years worth of stuff to rewrite. That takes time. So I would not let my one child speak that way to another child. I would not let anyone speak like that to my kids.
Right.
And we've all seen that happen. And I will just get in their face. No, that is not. I don't know how you talk about your house, but that is not how we talk in our house. We will not act like that. And if you don't like that, you can go home.
Right.
We've all had to do some version of that. So why don't we do it to ourselves? And to me, it always goes, frankly, it's about modeling what I want for my kids in their lives, and the kind of like what I want for them. I have to live it before they can. And I don't want them doing that to themselves either. So I have to fight it.
Right.
So in a business.
Yeah. If one of my kids talked to themselves that way and I heard it, like everything would stop. like, oh no, we're going to take care of you. Right. Like let's speak some true care.
That's pull over on the side of the road conversation, right?
Totally.
Just do it every single time you hear that. Stop. Is that true? Okay, quote unquote, it may be true, but is that accurate? Is that kind? Or am I giving myself grace? You just kind of keep going through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is true I did not lose 50 pounds last year. That is true. But you're leaving out the fact that I did lose 15. That's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to give myself and forgive myself for not losing 50 pounds last year, because maybe that was not, maybe that was insurmountable. But I am going to
Mm-hmm.
and be kind to myself that I did lose 15. So we're going to celebrate the fact that I lost 15. And I will tell you, when I first started doing this, it felt really stupid. Like I felt like an idiot in my head,
Mm-hmm.
because it is kind of weird. But I've been working on this probably, my oldest is 13. I probably have been working on this for 13 years. So like now it starts, and I'm like that little voice might get 2 words out now, and I'm like, zip it. Nope, not listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm better at catching.
I love that. I love it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great.
When you feel that, you have to, you have to stop beating yourself up. You have to start looking at your successes. And we talked, I mentioned something to you earlier called imposter syndrome, and you mentioned you had never heard that phrase before.
Right.
Okay, so I looked up a really good definition on the internet. Okay, imposter syndrome is the idea that you've only succeeded due to luck and not because you're actually qualified, you have experience, or you have talent. So basically, I'm here, but I don't deserve it. Okay, like I don't belong here. I'm a fraud. That in a nutshell is imposter syndrome. Okay, and according to this particular study, 70% of people have felt this at some point in their lives. However, we as women do this to ourselves even more. Okay, so it's basically the ability to internalize and own your success is the idea. Perfectionists deal with this. Like the type A superwoman, that's people who have always frankly had it easy, and now something's hard. Now you have for it. All of a sudden you start questioning yourself.
Right.
In the business world, this is actually something I've seen. So let's say there are 2 people going after a job, a male and a female. A male's going to look at the list of qualifications for the job. He's going to have experience doing about 50% of it. He's going to look at the rest. He's like, yeah, I haven't done that before, but I could do it. Yeah, I could do that. And he's going to apply. Women actually statistically wait till they have like 100 to 110% of the qualifications and the background and experience before they will even consider applying, because they don't feel qualified, even though they've done.
Wow.
Yeah. So like with my clients, when it's a male, I'm like, if you have 75% of the qualifications, then you can apply, because I want them to kind of push a little bit, because I'm a female, and I think, but also for women, it's getting permission. It's like, look, as long as that 25 to 30% isn't something that's going to preclude you from actually being able to do the job, like being fluent in Japanese, right? Like I'm not going to learn that in the next 3 weeks. That's impossible. But
for sure, you can't fake that.
Can't fake that. But as long as nothing's going to completely preclude you from doing the job, hello, they want you to have a security clearance. They need you to speak fluent Japanese. As long as you have 70 to 75% of it, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? So this is how I've seen this kind of like in job search relate, but even in business. How many times do we tell ourselves to not go for something because, well, I've never done that before? I've done that. The very first time I got paid to speak at an event, and I was going to charge I don't know, it's like, maybe a couple $200. Is that enough? And one of my male friends, who was one of my mentors, heard me say that. He's like, absolutely not. I've seen you speak for free and you deserve more. And I went, well, how much? He's like, don't even walk in their door unless they give you $1,500. And I'm like, I'm speaking for 30.
Wow.
I'm like, I'm speaking for 30 minutes. And he's like, I don't care. He's like, you have to value what you're worth. And I'm like,
yeah, look at how much you undersold yourself for the value. Like that's a significant difference.
And here's the thing. I didn't feel comfortable at 1,500. So I put 13 and I figured I'd take 1,000. I was giving myself room to negotiate. They didn't even blink at the 1,300. They're like, yeah, sure. Instantly.
Wow.
No question.
That's awesome.
No negotiate. Well, then I was mad because I left money on the table.
I know, right? You should have gone for the 1,500 like you said.
They didn't even, there was no pushback. And so the second there was no pushback, I'm like, I should have asked for 18 and then settle for 50.
Right.
So that, because of imposter syndrome, I had spoken billions of times before, but it was always kind of on a volunteer basis. And this was the first time somebody was willing to pay me for it. And I was like, I was thinking of my per hour rate. And well, I'm going to be, with travel and everything, it's going to be about 2 hours. So I don't know, a couple $100, right? That seems fair for my time. And he's like, no, they're paying for your expertise and your knowledge. And that's worth more. He did not blink at 15. He says, I don't go anywhere for less than $2,000. And I went, really? He's like, yeah, I don't walk out of my house for less than $2,000. He's like, this is your first time. I think you should go for 15. And I went, again, it's that imposter syndrome of like, I don't deserve this, or I don't think I'm worth it, or I don't think I'll get it, or somebody's going to figure out that I'm fake and I don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
We do this in business. So we even have to rewrite that. It's not the fake it till you make it approach, but it's close.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't want you to fake it till you make it, because if you're faking it till you're making it, you're faking it. Other people might not, but you do. And so I want it to be more true and more authentic to that. But there is a little bit of acting like you know what you're doing.
A little bit of hardball.
A little bit of faking it. Maybe not, faking is not a good word. I have to come up with a better word. A little bit of playing above your station until you get to the next level of station. As we wrap up our episode today, I want to thank you all for listening in. There are a ton of great podcasts out there, but you chose to spend your time here with me, so thank you. Please be sure to check out all the show notes for the links to my site, workingwhilehomeschooling.com, and all of the great ways that you can connect with me online. I do appreciate our listener supporters, so if you've enjoyed today's podcast, you too can support me with a small monthly donation that's going to help me continue with great content and interviews like you've heard here today on the Working While Homeschooling podcast. Just check out the show notes for the link. I also appreciate your online reviews. All of you that have been subscribing to the podcast, thank you to everyone who's been sharing this with your homeschooling friends. And if you know someone that you think would be a great guest on our podcast, please let me know at julie@workingwhilehomeschooling.com. Thank you for listening in today on part 1 of the episode with Colleen. Make sure you come back to next week to hear part 2. And make sure you're all joining us in our Facebook group for a continuing conversation on today's topic and beyond. I look forward to seeing each of you soon at our next podcast for Working While Homeschooling.